Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live on CGTN. We begin in Beijing, where officials from the Xinjiang Uygur Autonomous Region talked about progress in the region. They set the record straight: no terrorist attacks in the last 3 years, and GDP growth 8.5% since 2012. This says 600,000 people in the region are expected to be lifted out of poverty this year, with tourism a major contributor to the local economy. Last year, over 150 million tourists from both China and abroad visited Xinjiang. But progress in improving living conditions in Xinjiang Uygur Autonomous Region were largely ignored in the Western capitals, as believed by China. Last Tuesday, the U.S. House of Representatives approved a bill which calls for tougher measures to be taken against Beijing. China minced no words in opposing the bill. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said American politicians are ignorant, and she also said that they would understand better if they've been to Xinjiang. Here's a look at why Beijing put so much effort into preventing and countering terrorism in Xinjiang over the past few years.
Chaos was rampant in China's westernmost region. Violent attacks were targeting civilians of all ethnic groups. Xinjiang became a battlefield in China's fight against terrorism. According to incomplete statistics, thousands of terror attacks were launched in Xinjiang from 1990 to 2016. On October 28, 2013, an SUV ran through barricades in front of the gate tower and burst into flames. The attack killed 2 civilians and wounded over 40. Before the Tiananmen attack, the group swore so-called jihad on a barren hill on the outskirts of Urumqi. This security video shows how machete wielding terrorists from Xinjiang attacked commuters in southwest China's Yunnan province at the Kunming railway station in March 2014. They killed 31 people and wounded over 140. 2 months after the Kunming incident, 5 terrorists rammed their vehicles into shoppers at the morning market in Xinjiang's regional capital, Urumqi, setting off explosives. They killed 39 people and wounded 94. On September 21, 2014, she accompanied her parents to go shopping. It was that day that terrorists struck. Declame's amputation required 2 operations. For extremists, anyone can be a target. On July 30th, 2014, the chief imam at Kashgar's main mosque was stabbed to death. Juma Tayyir was also the deputy president of the Xinjiang Islamic Association. The horrific images and alarming number of violent crimes reveal the seriousness of the security situation in China's western frontier. Chinese police have identified Xinjiang as a key battlefield.
More on Xinjiang and all the latest development, we're joined in our Beijing studio Yan Shuai, an analyst at the Anti-Terrorism Center for China Institute of Contemporary International Relations. Sir, welcome to our program. Joining us in the studio once again, also we have Edward Lehman, the managing director of Lehman Lee and Xu Law Firm. That's a law firm based here in Beijing. Also joining us in Tehran from Iran, Bobby Nadari. He's a journalist and political commentator. Welcome to the 3 of you. Now, Mr. Yan, so the most important thing people have not seen over the past few years is how violent the scenes were during the past terrorist attacks in Xinjiang. Many wonder why it took so long for all the footages and the facts to come out.
Yeah, I think China's government, also including the local provincial government in Xinjiang, they are quite focused on doing things on counterterrorism and on de-radicalization, but maybe they are not quite good at speak out about what they are doing. So this may create some suspicions from outside, especially from the Western world, from the U.S. Congress, maybe some U.S. politicians who are long time criticizing China for almost everything on any issues. So they may use it as an excuse to raise pressure on China's government and also the local government. And I think as the mounting pressure, especially from the U.S., the government, including the central and the local government, they feel that they are very need to speak out about the counterterrorism and the counter-extremism measures in Xinjiang. Actually, it's taking effect, and I think it's on the right way to combating international terrorism and extremism.
To you, what is the right way?
And it's a global problem and global challenge. Not only China faced by the threat from terrorism and extremism, and if we take U.S. as an example, U.S. has started the global war on terror for 20 years, and I think U.S. has failed the war, and U.S. has too heavily focused on the military strike against terrorist groups, and even some civilians were killed by the U.S. strikes in some Muslim countries in Afghanistan, Iraq. But I think China is taking a different way based on the experiences and lessons learned from the U.S. and from other Muslim countries. And that is to strike hard against the terror groups on the one hand, and on the other hand, China's government taking comprehensive measures to tackle the roots of terrorism and extremism, and by setting up the vocational education and training centers is one kind of creation of local government and central government. And I think this is a new way, and maybe provide some new thoughts for other countries to learn from. And I think it is wise-ball for the U.S. politicians, some of the politicians, to stop playing with the double standards and calling white black, and maybe they will learn some valuable experiences from China's ways of combating terrorism, and maybe they will save their failed global war on terror.
Interesting, you put it that way. If I could just follow up with
Sure.
a last question to Mr. Yan before I go to the other guest. Mr. Yan, how should we see the timing that CGTN now is putting out this documentary, certainly revealing a lot of unrevealed, shall I say, information and footages about what happened over the past few years in Xinjiang during those terrorist attacks, as China sees it. But at the same time, we see the vocational training, as you put it, schools were dissolved also almost at the same time. How should we see the timing of all of these events at the same time? Well, the U.S. Congress was trying to put out a bill against China and wrongly accused China as China sees it.
Yeah, maybe in the past 2 years, U.S. is challenging China in Hong Kong issues, in Taiwan issues, and also in Xinjiang issues. And I think what U.S. is doing is to try to put a global pressure on China and to contain the development of China and to maintain its U.S. long-time hegemony around in the world. And I think why the China's government has held some press conference and also produced some documentary on the Xinjiang terrorism issues. I think the local government has come to realize that the false media reports by some Western press and by some Western politicians have created a problem for China because it hurt China's reputation and images globally. It may create some problems unnecessarily for China in some other countries. So China must stand up and to fight against the false propaganda by the Western media and the U.S. politicians.
I see. In an effort to set the record straight as China sees it on Xinjiang, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Hua Chunying did a quick survey with foreign journalists attending a media conference today. And the result is not so surprising as she sees it. Take a look.
我想做一个现场调查，在座的外国记者朋友们。
I want to ask all foreign journalists, have any one of you seen the documentary of terrorism in Xinjiang? Anyone raise your hands, please? Nobody? None of you have seen them? Okay, I'm disappointed. That answers well why the mainstream Western media went silent on the documentary.
Well, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson certainly was surprised in her words. Mr. Lehman, how do you see the debate, if I could put it in a very polite word, between the spokesperson of the Chinese Foreign Ministry and certainly the Foreign Press Corps there?
Well, I mean, certainly information is coming out. If folks should at least be watching the video, I think that she does have a point that there should at least be some dialogue, whether there's they're suspect of that information or not. There's more information that is coming out. It's a bit of a Mexican standoff. As an American, I can say we're geographically challenged sometimes, so sometimes we mix up Xinjiang with Hong Kong and these types of issues, and certainly the 535 members of the United States Congress aren't probably as informed even as the people that were in that room that haven't watched the documentary. So it's very difficult, I think, from somebody in D.C. to be able to understand what's happening, let alone us that are here in Beijing trying to understand these issues. What I think there needs to be is better dialogue and better understanding, and I think the documentary at least is a starting off point or jumping off point to be able to understand the intricacies of those issues. One is you do have a growing economy with Xinjiang. You've got 24.8 million people. You got a place the size of Texas, larger than the size of Texas. You've got a whole bunch of security issues that are there. You've got 150 million people that have visited there last year as tourists safely. So, I mean, there are a lot of things going on just besides these issues as well. But I do believe that there's these two camps, the Western media camp and maybe the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that are kind of coming to loggerheads here. And I think there has to be some kind of a de-escalation on those issues.
Mr. Nadari, as a journalist and a commentator, do you think it's an issue of perception, or do you think it's an issue of debates with very different, quote unquote, as they see it, facts? How should we see the current situation? You know, how should we even debate and discuss about the current situation?
Well, first of all, my condolences to the families of the victims of terror attacks in Xinjiang and elsewhere in China. They didn't deserve to die in such a horrible way or get wounded. The problem with the Western media and the Western governments is double standard and hypocrisy. They think that they are the only ones that are at the front line of the war on terrorism and extremism in the Middle East and beyond, and they think that they shouldn't give any credit to other countries like China. Why? Because China is not on the same camp with the Western camp in the war on terrorism and extremism. But that doesn't change the fact that China is one of the biggest victims of terrorism in Asia, and it needs some credit when it comes to re-educating these, desperate souls, depraved souls back to the society and re-engage them and rehabilitate them. Let's not forget the fact that what is going on in Europe is exactly what China has been doing for the past 3 years or so, which is re-engaging and rehabilitating and re-educating former terrorist individuals. That's precisely what they have learned from China. Why? Because this program is sincere, this program is is honest, is based on justice and fairness, and it has been a success over the past 3 years or so. Why? Because there has been no terror attacks since the program started 3 years ago. I think China needs to be given the credit because Europe is also following the same kind of program to deal with its own terrorist individuals, and the fact that the Western media doesn't care about the situation in Xinjiang is all about misinformation. They don't like the idea that China is going to become the biggest economy in the world, and it has been a success. It has successfully managed to deal with its terrorist individuals in Xinjiang and beyond.
Okay, Mr. Nadari, if I can, and also Mr. Lehman as well, anti-terrorism issue, if I remember right, since September the 11th, it's a global cooperation issue. It's one of the biggest issues that demands and certainly already acquired very massive global cooperation from all corners of the world. I do not understand how we are seeing this pendulum that only a few years ago, it was one of the biggest uniting issues of all nations, all police forces, and all people with a love for peace. Now it has become such a divided issue as to how different countries approach it. I seem to have some deficit of understanding in this regard. I want to acquire some of your knowledge as well. Put the rhetorics aside, Mr. Nadari. What do you think are the reasons? Can we still be able to work together to fight terrorism, which is globally?
Well, China is not alone in this, fight against terrorism and extremism. It needs all the help it can get from the Western world and the international community. Maybe the reason is because they think that China is too big and strong enough to deal with its own situation and terrorism inside Xinjiang province and beyond. But that's not the case. I think there needs to be some kind of dialogue, communication and understanding, and of course cooperation between China and the rest of the international community, because terrorism doesn't know any borders.
Yes.
Terrorism doesn't know any language or religion. China needs help because, yes, it's not perfect the way it is trying to re-educate its former terrorist individuals, but we are not living in a perfect world. There will be mistakes, but China shouldn't be blamed for these mistakes, because this is an ongoing struggle, not just by China, but with the rest of the international community. Let's not forget the fact that America failed to win the war on terrorism in the Middle East. We shouldn't think that China alone can win the campaign against terrorism and extremism.
I see. Mr. Lehman, also from your perspective?
Sure. It's an ongoing process, and each country has its own way of dealing with it. We had the Patriot Act. It was unified after 9/11 because of the crisis that happened there. I mean, and that was a very, very symbolic unification of the Congress at that point in time. And then it's since sort of digressed. The goalposts continue to move. The rules, laws, and policies, regulations of each country is different, and the way that the society is able to inculcate that into the bigger picture is continually changing. So, I mean, I'm optimistic that there's going to be a chance that this is going to be able to work out under its own characteristics.
We hope we can. Mr. Yang?
Final words. Yeah, final words. The major background is that the U.S. does not want to continue its global war on terror. That's the main reason why the global counterterrorism war has become from a united war against terrorism now become very much divided. So because the United States does not want to lead the global war on terror, and U.S. realized that it's a costly effort, and U.S.'s focus now is to contain the development of China, not terrorism anymore.
All right. Well, I see a lot of perceptions certainly in this discussion, but for now, I want to thank the three of you for being with us. Let's see how the future would evolve. They would eventually know what exactly is the nature of all the things that's happening right now. Thank you so much, Yan Shuai, Edward Lehman, Bobby Nadari. Really appreciate it, gentlemen. Thank you.